Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today, I guarantee you we're going to have a fantastic conversation. We're talking with Jonathan Metrick. Now, Jonathan, you're not only the Chief Growth Officer at Sagard, you are a private equity company, and you have an entire portfolio of companies, both B2B and B2C, that you consult with on a regular basis and help them grow. In fact, you've helped over 100 different companies grow. You've worked with companies globally. You've lived globally. I would say that probably qualifies you to have a global perspective on what we're going to be talking about today, which is how to double down on your most profitable ICP. But before we get started on that, I'd love if you can top the introduction I just gave you to expand a little bit more on your background before we get started.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. So as you mentioned, I'm an operating partner at a fund called Sagard. We invest in both venture capital and private equity, B2B and B2C businesses globally, primarily focused on fintech, financial services, and B2B SaaS. And I'm based in New York. And so I support our global portfolio of venture and private equity businesses, helping them scale, grow, marketing and sales, everything related to revenue acceleration. I've been doing this for about 5 years. Prior to that, my entire career has been as an operating executive, leading marketing teams across venture stage startups, as well as big blue chip companies like Procter & Gamble and Tiffany & Co.
So here I'm dying to ask you, we had a call before this where we talked, we picked the topic. And the topic we picked was how to double down on your most profitable ICP. Here's what I'd love to do just at the start. Why is, of everything that you're doing and how you consult and grow with companies in the portfolio, why pick the ICP as a really important place to start and have a topic about? Like, why is the ICP, and then a profitable ICP, obviously, why is that so important that you wanted to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, so for folks who may be less familiar, your ideal customer profile or ICP, has really always been a foundation component of growth and marketing, but has become increasingly more so as we stepped off of kind of the growth at all costs, zero interest rates, cheap capital decade from, kind of up until 2022. And, in that environment, there was a lot of capital splashing around. If you were growing, you were good. And the focus was just simply on expansion. And so with a decade of that, you ended up with a lot of businesses who had grown with a lot of different ICPs, a lot of different types of customers, a lot of different target segments. And, when the market turned, the interest rates went up and, the cheap capital was turned off, you really started to have to take a look at, well, who are our core customers? Because we can't actually afford to just buy more growth. And we have to double down on our core ICP that has true product market fit for our business and is profitable for us to continue to scale with. And I think a few years ago, you had the luxury of kind of not having to be so focused on that, because as long as you were growing more revenue, you were good. Now there's much more scrutiny around capital deployment and profitability. And you have to have a very clear sense of your ICP to do that effectively and grow effectively.
And, for any company, long-term profitable growth these days, we have to be thinking about things like how are we reducing churn, right? How are we increasing NRR? And it used to be growth at like you were saying, at all costs, but that would lots of times mean bringing in your customers that weren't your ideal ICP. That meant that you weren't as well suited to serve them. It took more resources. They churned more. 30, 40% of annual revenue growth and in a B2B company should be coming from your existing customers. So if they're churning, they're not ideal, and you're bringing the periphery in, it absolutely is going to impact your long-term profitable growth. So that makes perfect sense to me. In your mind, what's the definition of a profitable ICP versus just an ICP itself?
Yeah, I think, for me, you teed up some of the right vectors to be taking a look at, right? In the sense of when you're generating this customer, are they actually using your product, engaging with your product, and, ideally after the contract's up, renewing your product and maybe even then expanding and buying more features from it, right? Have
Right.
you actually secured product market fit with that customer? Are they buying? Are they happy? They're using it, and maybe they're even telling a friend or two. And I think that's one vector that I think a lot of people glossed over is, okay, great, they signed up and they used the product a few times. They must be, a good customer for us. Well, let's see how it turned out a year or two after and whether they needed to renew the contract. Whereas their budgets were being cut back because the market was declining and people were concerned about profitability. Did they renew that contract? Did you actually add value to them? That's one vector. And the second piece is around the profitability, right? And so, if it costs you 5x to get that certain customer in versus another segment, which, was far more efficient and way less work and required way less time, how do you want to think about that in terms of the profitability of actually acquiring this customer and keeping this customer? And so I think there's this element around your ICP as someone that signs up for your product, uses your product, loves your product, renews and keeps buying your product, probably tells a friend or two about it if they're asked about it, and is someone that you can get in front of profitably and scale that vector. Those are all the pieces around kind of what I deem as kind of more of a profitable target ICP that more folks should be focusing in on as they look to scale in 2025.
And you started out by saying that it was part of that foundational piece, right? Just identifying that ideal customer profile. That many times is a part of misalignment, in the go-to-market team. Now, you consult with CMOs and CROs and CEOs every single day. Talk to me about the misalignment, the opportunity for alignment. Is that a big problem that you've seen with the companies that you consult with? Just what's the state of alignment around the ICP?
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies widely. And I think the best performing companies have a very tight alignment and agreement on who is their target customer, how much should they be, spending to try and acquire them and keep them and or not. And I think, one of the things that is critical with securing alignment is ensuring that everybody is looking at the same data
Yes.
to make decisions on, okay, well, is this actually a good customer for us or not?
Right.
And I find often when there isn't alignment on things like the ICP or if the if that target segment's profitable, it's because the data is unclear or not connected in the firm to enable folks to make that decision and align on a direction.
And when you're talking about the data, give us some examples. Like what kind of data is the most important that we should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, so I think you should be connecting as much data as possible to, start making some decisions on how you should grow and, where you want to be spending your money. Right. And it's an age-old problem in marketing and sales, especially in B2B, where, it's tough. These sales cycles are long. You might have done a bunch of actions on the marketing side or upper funnel that eventually leads to a different action down funnel. And how do you connect these things together? I first met somebody at an event, but then they saw an ad or an email, and that was the thing that kind of kicked them over. Like, how do you track all these things? It's hard. And so, often the data exists in different places, and we haven't done the work to connect everything together to a single source, single point of view. And then doing the work of saying, okay, great, given the data that we have, how do we want to think about the different audiences we have, the profitability of those segments? Let's make sure that we're connecting revenue data, retention data, upsell and cross-sale data back into the system and creating a holistic view. And so I think that's probably the biggest challenge is the data exists in lots of different places. You've got to connect the systems together. And then there's a degree of analysis that you need to do to say, okay, cool, given the data we have, how do we want to think about these customers and put on kind of targets and a view of profitability?
It's interesting. I had a CRO come on, and he said, Steve, every B2B company should be getting 30 to 40% of their new annual revenues from existing customers. So one of the definitions of potentially a profitable ICP is one that you can expand revenues within. They fit that profile. That churn is down, that's low, right? What kind of ways are you cross-selling and upselling? What kind of paths do you have? Do they fit that model? If they don't, then here's my question for you. How powerful does say, CRO need to be in saying no to acquiring new deals that don't fit that ideal customer profile?
I mean, I think it's essential, right? I think that's where in any business, prioritization is critical because we don't have unlimited capital. We don't have unlimited resources. We have to make decisions.
Yeah.
And the ability to say no frees you up to say yes to other things. And if you are not saying no to, certain customer profiles, certain segments, unprofitable go-to-market motions, you're leaving yourself exposed and not really being able to focus on the stuff that's going to generate positive, profitable growth for you. And so saying no is essential. And, I've seen some of the best portfolio companies, in my fund, they have don't sell lists where they've proactively called out these segments we are not counting toward your target. If you want to get a commission, we are not accepting that. And they give them the reason why, right? They're like, look, this customer segment, they sign up and they have way higher churn, or it takes them 3 times as long, or, we're not a great segment fit for them. But educating your sales force around who is good and who is not is important. Holding the line on, we get that you might want to bring these in to meet your quota, but they're not really going to be a profitable customer for us. And, being able to say no to that and holding that line, I think is critical.
I love that. So this data around defining the ICP is as critical as important as saying, okay, well, it's the same data that's saying these aren't our ideal customer profile. And so therefore you answered the next question I had, which was, because if I'm a salesperson, I'm the CRO, I'm in the board meeting, right? And you guys are saying, hey, how's this quarter's quota going? And how are we doing on next quarter? And that's how I'm compensated. But you literally took segments out of the compensation plan.
Yep. And again, this requires, robust analysis. You probably need some historical data to gauge, quality of your pipe, quality of customer segments. But if you have that, you're not going to be doing your business any favors by bringing in a ton of customers into the pipe that we know long-term are going to churn. Like, we're paying all the money to get them in the door and to service them as the sales teams. But if they're not going to stick around, you can burn a lot of capital and be highly unprofitable if a huge chunk of your customer segment is, the wrong customer.
Absolutely. So in your mind, because I like to kind of have some practical ideas on this, like what are the KPIs in your mind that define the most profitable ICP?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna slightly vary by business, but I think, again, just general markers that I use and take a look at would be things like, of course, the engagement on the product is critical, right? So we're getting a customer in the door, do we have product market fit for them? Are they interested? Are they engaging with the product? I would look at things like speed to close, right? So from the start of the process to the end, or is it really difficult to get these folks across, or is this segment kind of jumping through quickly each stage of the conversion funnel because, they're excited about it too, versus, what we had to convince them, twist their arm to eventually convert. And, next year when we're not applying tons amount of pressure, they're going to churn, right? So speed through the funnel. I think the, product engagement, time to implementation and accurate implementation. I like looking at product usage metrics. And then obviously, again, like the churn and retention rates, and then potential upsell, cross-sell, right? To your point, you said, if the CRO is quoting 30 to 40% of your revenue for a given year should be from your previous customers. Well, guess who's going to be renewing is people who are using the product a lot
Yeah.
and maybe are excited about, the upstream feature launches we've got. You've got to be focused on those. So I think, again, it's a mix of kind of speed of conversion, engagement with the product, usage of the product, retention and willingness to re-sign, and, excitement to kind of potentially upsell, cross-sell. All those vectors I think are important. And then the last thing I think I would just ensure that you're watching is, what is the ACV of your product relative to your go-to-market motion, right? And so if you're using a enterprise style, go-to-market motion where highly targeted, lots of people involved, and, the ACV is only 50 grand, that probably doesn't line up super well to an enterprise sized template, despite the fact that you're doing enterprise sized go-to-market motions. So ensuring that kind of the amount of money you're spending to generate that customer and to generate revenue from that customer lines up with how much they're giving you. Because we saw, I think, a lot of businesses in the growth at all cost times just kind of throwing bodies at a problem. And that's fine, but it needs to be profitable for you as well.
Going back to that, that growth from, expanding, revenue from existing customers, the mentality inside of most B2B companies is new logo development, new logo development, new logo development. I mean, like, how are we filling the pipeline with new customers, new prospects? If, let's say, right, a third of new revenue is going to come out of existing customers. In your mind, with the companies that you're consulting with in your portfolio, how much of their attention should be going towards that revenue expansion activity versus new logo development activity?
I really honestly think it depends on stage. And so the earlier the stage of the business you are, maybe I'm going to go to the venture stage, you're kind of like a seed, series A, series B. You probably have a lot of room to do with new logo development. You're very small, and you're validating product market fit. You got a lot of folks in the door to establish kind of who is that core market, and okay, great. But I think as you start to scale, get bigger, you start to get increasing amounts of market share with your core segment. If you've got 500 customers in the universe and your total addressable market is 2,000 customers, there's a certain point where you're not just gonna be able to keep getting another 500 customers every year. Right. So as you get bigger, the focus increasingly becomes then around retention, cross-sell, upsell of your core biggest customers. Because it's always easier to obviously keep someone in the door that already knows you, maybe likes you, versus finding another new segment and maybe a new geography or trying to sell them some new product. So I think the bigger you get, the more developed and mature your company gets, the more of the shift moves to retention and existing kind of net revenue versus kind of new revenue you're bringing in the door every year.
Makes perfect sense. So now that's kind of like the game plan, right? And how we should be thinking and kind of standardizing around our profitable ICP. It sounds easy, but I know there are challenges, right? So, but there was a study that was done that said that the average alignment on the ICP between marketing and sales was 16%. So there is a big challenge. There are many obstacles and objections that come along the way in defining a profitable ICP that then everyone can align in the go-to-market right behind. In your mind, what are the biggest challenges to defining this ICP that companies need to be able to get around?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Again, the first piece, as we discussed, is you have to have the data. If you do not have the data, it's going to be very difficult for everybody in 10 people across a cross-functional team to agree on, well, who's the best customer, right? Every person have their own opinion on that. And to remove the qualitative nature of that exercise, to push it into more of a quantitative data-oriented discussion, you must have the data foundation to allow people to look at this, same sort of information and decide a path forward. So connected data, I think, is the first piece. assuming you have the connected data, you then have to do the work, the analysis to define the ideal profitable customer segment. Great.
Yeah.
Given what we can see, given what we know, let's all take a look at who we think is actually the ICP in the mix. And
Yeah.
there's a data analysis around that. And this is back to this piece of the customer lifetime value. So it's not just the people that we can get in fastest. It's not just the people that bring in the most revenue year one. If we're looking at a multi-year time horizon, who actually is the most likely for us to be total profitable, most profitable
Yeah.
customer? And those are often different. If they churn and churn's high, that will radically shape who the ICP is. So you've got data, you've got to define it. And then the next component is you've got to track it, right? So we've got to then actively be looking at, as we're generating leads at the top of the funnel, as we're hitting Q1 and Q2 targets, how are we pacing against bringing in more of this profitable ICP? And so
Right.
ensuring that there's dashboarding happening, that there's reporting out on that component, there's feedback loops happening actively throughout the year on these pieces. And then the last piece, I think, would just be goaling folks against it. And so our discussion earlier about saying no to the wrong profiles, well, let's incentivize people to get the right customer in the door, right? And let's take a look at incentive and comp plans to ensure that people are bringing in the right profitable customer for us and that they're rewarded for doing that too. If everything's just treated the same, maybe the sales folks are just going to be bringing in whatever's easiest to convert. And the marketing team's going to be bringing in leads that are just the cheapest versus the best.
Yeah. It's amazing what a good, highly aligned comp plan with your goals could do, right?
Now,
So,
to summarize that, I'd say data connectivity, defining the ICP with a bit of analysis, ensuring you can track it, dashboard it, kind of visualize it, and then goaling the teams against it, I think would be the 4 areas I would kind of make sure folks are focused on.
so I'm going to deviate for just a moment here, but come right back. And one of the ways that we got onto this conversation around the ICP is that you and I had a call before this to talk about what do we want to talk about, right? And what I do with those calls is I asked you a really simple question that I said was really difficult to answer, but you had a really good answer. And the question was, what is the greatest challenge from your perspective in creating long-term profitable growth for our B2B companies? And you immediately went to the ICP. What's happening as I ask more and more chief growth officers, CROs, CEOs, CMOs this question, there's an additional trend. One is the focus on the ICP as a foundation. The other trend really surprised me. The answers were more internal on their challenges to long-term sustainable growth. And a big part of that was the alignment in the go-to-market process and getting the teams to work together. That's my question then to you is, how important are, just from your perspective, internal versus external challenges to creating growth within your portfolio companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're both critical. And we don't operate in a vacuum, so we have to respond to the market. And we saw that last 2 or 3 years when the market shifted and everybody went from growth at all costs to profitability at all costs, you need to be responding to that. So that's an external dynamic, but of course the internal, workings of your engine are critical. That's your product. That's how you're, getting in front of customers or not effectively. And I think alignment is critical within an organization for it to work effectively, profitably, and, is marketing on the same page as sales, on the same page as customer success, on the same page as the product teams and what they're building, upstream product innovation. All these pieces need to be connected. And I think, again, this gets back to these pieces of, is the data there for these people to all be looking at the same sets of data and making decisions? Have we done analysis and informed the people in the organization cross-functionally around what are our priorities and why? And if people don't understand, oh, well, we're going after this sort of customer, this sort of product, and this is why,
Right.
I would expect them to all march in the same direction. They're not sure. They're probably looking at one little slice of the pie and they're making decisions based off of that. And so there's an element of kind of, connectivity of the data, ensuring people can look at it and then proactively having these discussions and ensuring everybody's marching toward the same direction. That's not going to happen. I've never seen a business that just kind of happens by accident. It's a very deliberate, kind of considered, hard to execute alignment. But when you do it, amazing things can happen.
But isn't that ultimately why, and you can have your own perspective on this, but kind of the prevailing thought is that from a VC or private equity firm, that you're going to invest in the team first, the idea second, because it is that team that's actually going to make it happen. Right. Now you can have the best product in the world, but without the right team, it's not going to, it's not going to happen. And vice versa too. Right. But in that kind of age-old mentality of we invest in the team first, in the idea second, do you agree with that? And if so or not, why?
It's interesting. I think it's a chicken or the egg.
Yeah.
If you have the right team, they can kind of figure it out. But honestly, I actually want to know my product first, because if I have an amazing solution for enterprise companies, I need an enterprise sales team to generate revenue, growth, profit with them. And if I'm hiring a B2C CMO to do an enterprise style go-to-market motion as a CMO, they may not actually know how to do that. And so you could have an amazingly talented commercial lead, but if they're not working in the right context with the right product, maybe they'll do well, but maybe they won't. And so I think it actually is critical for these businesses to have a sense of, okay, what product do we have, and who are we selling to? And that then determines, at least from the go-to-market perspective, right, the commercial team's perspective, who should we be layering in to help us do this? And I think I've seen many examples where, CEOs did not understand or were unfamiliar with the commercial function, the sales function, the marketing function. And, they were selling enterprise or they were selling product-led growth, and they just kind of hired someone that looked good on, CV perspective, but they did not have the stage-specific experience. They did not have the specific go-to-market motion experience, and, it didn't work out.
Right. So you're basically saying both critically important.
Both are critically important. I mean, again, you're going to need both. I tend to want to start with the product, because I often find that then sets the tone for what sort of person should I be coupling with this product at what stage to really accelerate the growth, and not the other way around. Like, I don't start with a VP of Google and then say, okay, I need a product that can, it's usually, I've got this product for this sort of audience. Who's sold to that audience before? Who's really good at selling this sort of product to them? And let's get them in the door.
So I've got one more question. And that last question is that we've covered a lot. Well, I covered a lot of territory. But if you wanted to leave the executives, the B2B executives that are watching this podcast, you wanted to leave them with one takeaway to remember, what would that one takeaway be?
I mean, I think we boiled the ocean with ICP. So that is it in and of itself. Just make sure you know who you're selling to, that it's the right one when they're profitable. I think the other component would just be, I've worked in, venture and private equity now for a number of years. And what is increasingly apparent is there's not one way to grow, which is great. Thank goodness. Because if there was only one way to do things, that would be even harder for everybody chasing the same leads and the same channels with the same customers.
Right.
But I think what is important to note is you have to be really good at something. And so being very deliberate around what is it that we are going to actually own, double down on, disproportionately allocate resources to, and become the best in class at. And I think that is a really interesting note, because while there isn't one way to grow, businesses do choose a lane or two and dramatically scale that way. And I think not having a clear sense of what is our superpower, what are we doubling down on, what are we going to be best in class at, that I think is a really important item to note, because as you scale, you have to continue to get better at that thing and eventually become best in class in the world at it. And if you don't have a sense of what that would look like, the likelihood you're going to become best in class at something is pretty low.
It's amazing. I wish we had another 2 hours, but I know that people are going to have additional questions. Would it be appropriate that we gave a link to, say, your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out to you if they had questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I post periodically on everything kind of go to market growth related. So some ideas there, but no, would love to continue the conversation, in another forum.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan, for kind of expanding our mind and, the world that you live in day to day on again with so many different companies. Very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me, Steve. Great conversation, and always happy to geek out on growth.